Good evening and welcome to the Corte Madera Planning Commission for Tuesday, May 13th, 2025. Would you please call the roll?
Commissioner Bandel,
Here.
Commissioner Kenny,
Here.
Vice Chair Rizzo.
Here.
And Chair Chase.
Here.
And Commissioner Beshoyer is absent.
Thank you. Join me in a salute to the flag, please. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. At every meeting, we open it up for public comment. For that is not which on tonight's, that which is not on tonight's agenda. Is there anybody that would like to comment outside of our agenda? Claire, do you have anybody online?
Just online.
No hands raised. Okay. So we'll go directly after that to our new hearing. This is a zoning ordinance amendment application PL 25-0003 for proposed amendments to Title 18 of the zoning code to, number one, allow additional flexibility related to lot coverage and setbacks for uncovered decks 3 to 5 feet in height in the rear yard. This is limited to decks on Golden Hind Passage and adjacent to the bay. And number two, increase lot coverage by 2% for all residential parcels in the special flood hazard area in the R1 medium density residential zone. Who wrote that?
Sorry about that.
That's great. A lot of good words. All right. So who's going to introduce this and take this away?
I'll take it away. As you said, sorry, that was so long-winded. We are talking about a zoning ordinance amendment application that will allow some additional flexibility for those folks who want to raise their homes above base flood elevation in the flood zone. Just some background. The Town Council in August of 2024 adopted Ordinance 1038, and we all worked very hard on that with Mr. Phil Boyle, and that included lots of changes to our design review regulations, and one of them was to carve out an exemption to design review for projects that raise the finished floor of the home of 1 foot above base flood elevation in compliance with FEMA and Corte Madera standards. And since then, the town has approved 2 applications for FEMA lift projects that were exempt from design review, and we expect another one from the applicant, and there we're sure. Additionally, the town's shoreline adaptation engagement effort which was preceded and built upon the climate adaptation assessment from a few years ago. It features many actions that encourage more resilient and adaptive buildings in Corte Madera, and includes programs like modifying our existing regulations related to height or lot coverage or floor area, to provide some regulatory assistance for property owners that wish to raise their homes above base flood elevation for protection from floods. And so this amendment attempts to continue the town's efforts in that regard and assisting who want to or need to raise their home in the flood zone. January of 2025, an application was filed to amend the zoning ordinance to address additional flexibility in the zoning code related to decks attached to homes that have been raised. The application was filed by the owner of 299 Golden Hind Passage. And as part of this process, staff conducted a public workshop in April with the Flood Control Board. Slide, please. And the zoning amendment application is a result of the applicant's desire to raise their home by 2 feet 8 inches. And as part of the project, they wish to raise the existing attached deck. However, our zoning regulations currently don't allow for this. Under existing regulations, many homeowners are not able to raise all areas of their rear yard decks because of 2 specific development standards, and that's lot coverage and setback requirements. Decks that are more than 3 feet in height have to follow more stringent setback requirements, and they also start counting towards lot coverage, which can be a limiting factor for homeowners. There's about 1,100 parcels that are in the special flood hazard area. That's the light blue shown on this slide. That's about 34% of all parcels in Corte Madera. Next slide. Some homeowners in the flood zone voluntarily raise their homes above base flood elevation, and others are required to do so when a substantial improvement to the home is proposed. And to date, there's about 50 homes that have been raised above base flood elevation. This map is showing the last 15 years. You can see most of them are on the east side of town. There are some on the west side of town in Dara Gardens, but again, the bulk are in the Mariner Cove neighborhood, and many of those are on Golden Hind Passage. Included in the staff report are 2 tables that present some detail about the homes that have been raised on the east side of town, the finished floor that they were raised to, and the height of attached decks for some of those projects. And the list that is in the staff report is projects since 2016. That's the last time that base flood elevation was adjusted by FEMA. It went from 9 to 10. So those are the more recent projects. We'll dig into that in a little bit. Next slide, please. We'll go through some of our existing regulations and the limitations that they're presenting. Slide. Lot coverage is a development standard that regulates the footprint of structures on a lot. Maximum allowed residential lot coverage depends on your lot size and your zoning district. Almost all of our flood zone is zoned R1 medium density residential. There's a small handful, maybe 10 or so parcels that are zoned R1A out on Paradise Drive. But I'd say 99% of the flood zone parcels are zoned R1. And in R1, the maximum allowed lot coverage is shown on the screen here. It's 40%, and you can get additional 2% in certain instances. And this slide is just showing a graphic example of when a deck does not count as lot coverage on the left. When a deck is 3 feet or less in height, measured from grade to the deck surface, it does not count as lot coverage. Decks that are more than 3 feet above finished grade, they do count as lot coverage. Raising a home above base flood elevation increases building height, usually between 2 and 5 feet. And oftentimes that will impact the size and height of decks and landings and stairs that are attached to the home to reach the new higher finished floor. New decks and stairs are often more than 3 feet in height. And as a result, some homeowners are approaching or exceeding lot coverage when they raise their homes. Next slide, please. And in recognition of this issue in 2009, the town modified the allowed lot coverage for all homes in the flood zone. The language is in bold that was added to our lot coverage standards on the screen here. And it essentially added an additional 2% of lot coverage for uncovered decks that don't exceed the height of the finished floor, first floor of the home, and includes decks, landings, stairs that are needed to reach the new higher finished floor. In the R1 zone, in the flood zone specifically, most parcels are between 6,000 and 8,000 square feet in area. So 2% of that it computes to around 120 to 160 square feet of extra lot coverage that one can use for front porch or front landing, side or rear decks and landings. Next slide, please. So this added allowance is not always enough to accommodate the full reconstruction of existing decks when property owners raise their homes. And so homeowners are often using a 2-level deck design where the higher deck is at the same threshold as the new higher finished floor and counts towards lot coverage. And when you're approaching maximum lot coverage, the way to handle the rest of the deck is to create the step down deck that's 3 feet or less in height and does not count towards lot coverage. Next slide. And this 2-level deck design is not always the best for waterfront properties. It can be problematic, as you can see in the slide. During high tide events or storms, the lower deck isn't usable. The water can also cause additional wear and tear on the deck and the deck support underneath. And this slide is showing the applicant's lower deck area at 299 Passage. And these images on the next two slides are showing sunny day flooding. This is in 2015. And this is along Golden Hind Passage, and so is the next slide. And one can observe how important raised decks and decks generally are to these property owners, especially after they've gone through the process to elevate their homes. The second development standard that can limit homeowners' ability to include a raised deck when they elevate their home is required setbacks. And in Corte Madera, the required rear yard setback is 25 feet. And our zoning ordinance allows certain structures in a rear yard. It allows decks, for instance. A deck that is 3 feet or less in height can be as close as 5 feet to the side and rear property lines. And that's kind of what this graphic is showing. And on the next slide, we'll show you again. And this is actually, these graphics were reviewed with our last changes to the zoning ordinance, where we set some standards for deck setbacks on the left. On the left, the graphic is showing in hatch mark the areas of a lot that a deck that is 3 feet or less in height can be located. It can be in the rear yard setback, again, as close as 5 feet to the side and rear property lines. Raised decks, however, which we're getting with these raised homes, are subject to more restrictive standards. And on the right is showing a deck that's more than 3 feet in height. It may only extend 6 feet into the required rear yard setback. And again, that's the hatched area of the graphic on the right. And in other words, the required setback from the rear property line for a raised deck is 19 feet. So as soon as your deck is more than 3 feet in height, that setback from the rear property line increases to 19 feet. As I think I said before, when homeowners are raising their home, the height often increases somewhere between 2 and 5 feet, which impacts the height of decks. And new stairs and decks often exceed 3 feet height after it's raised. And particularly for waterfront homes, saltwater intrusion and tidal intrusion often make a raised deck one of the only viable solutions in their rear yard for a dry and usable backyard space. And moving along to our proposed ordinance amendments, we have developed several of those responsive to some of those limitations that I've described. And first one here is to include a definition of special flood hazard area in Title 18 zoning. There is a definition of special flood hazard area in Title 16, which is protection of flood hazard areas. The legal counsel for the town felt that it was important to include a definition in the zoning code because we do reference it several times, not just in these draft regulations, but through some of the regulations in Title 18. And so that's what you're looking at on the screen in your staff report is a definition for special flood hazard area. Additionally, staff is recommending modifying allowed lot coverage for elevated homes. What's shown on screen in strikeout and underline is the change. I stated previously that maximum lot coverage is 40%, but one can take advantage of an additional 2% if you elevate your home. And that is specifically for construction of uncovered decks that are no higher than the new finished floor of the first floor of the home. And this, as I said before, 2% is a modest increase in coverage, but we've observed that an additional 2% would be valuable for homeowners. They're trying to access the front of the home with new stairs and landings, typically not a deck in the front, and then to elevate homes in the back. This would apply to all areas of the special flood hazard area in the R1 zone. So you have Madera Gardens, you have Marina Cove and Marina Village. Currently applies to everybody and would continue to apply to everybody in the flood hazard area. Slide. And responsive to the application, staff recommends that the town provide more flexible setbacks for decks. And we've identified that this should, we're recommending that this apply to decks that are 3 feet in height, but not more than 5 feet in height that are attached to an elevated home for certain parcels. So again, our current regulations allow decks that are greater than 3 feet in height to only extend 6 feet into the required rear yard. And staff is recommending that a deck that is more than 3 feet in height, but not more than 5 feet in height, and it matches the finished floor elevation of the home once it's raised, to follow the same setback requirements as a deck that's 3 feet or less in height, which would place it 5 feet from the rear property line. And we're recommending that this allowance for decks between 3 and 5 apply to elevated homes on waterfront properties on Golden Hind Passage. These properties are experiencing tidal intrusion, storm surge, and backyard flooding regularly. So we've identified that this regulation would clearly benefit folks. The next slide. This is a figure that's showing the proposed regulation I talked about on the previous slide. So we have the wording, and then this is a graphic that would show the permitted location of the deck attached to an elevated home. So the yellow extent is showing the existing allowed extent for a deck that's raised. The hatch mark would is showing it's boxed in red, is showing the new allowed extent, which would be the same as for decks that are 3 feet or less in height, allowing them to be as close as 5 feet to the rear property line. And again, this is not for any raised deck. It would be decks between more than 3 and up to 5. So essentially, another way of saying it is that a deck that is 5 feet or less in height then would be following the same rules as a deck that's currently 3 feet or less. And this next slide is pretty substantial, and so I'll let you guys digest it after I go through it, and maybe you have some questions. Peter, if anybody does, we can stop or I can continue. So we're recommending that the measurement of coverage be modified to provide more flexibility for decks. And again, this is decks. We need we have existing flexibility for decks 3 feet and less in height. They don't count towards coverage. What we're seeking to do is provide that same flexibility for decks that are more than 3 up to 5. And it would, again, in order to take advantage of this provision, you need to meet certain criteria, and that criteria is listed on the slide from A through E. The site would need to be in the flood zone, of course. It would need to be on Golden Hind Passage, and it would need to have a rear property line on the water. The deck would need to be in the rear yard and attached to the primary residence. The primary residence would need to be elevated above base flood elevation, a minimum of 1 foot, in compliance with Corte Madera and FEMA standards. And the deck would not be allowed to be higher than the new finished floor of the first floor of the home. And it wouldn't not be in excess of 5 feet in height. And then lastly, of course, the setback standards that I talked about is the last criteria, that it would have to be set back 5 feet from rear property line. Yep.
Tracy, is it inclusive of the 4% lot coverage, or is it totally exempt? So someone can build all the way to the 5?
It's inclusive of the 4% lot coverage. And the difference really between the two is 4% lot coverage.
I mean, it's 4% extra, so it'd be 44% in this case.
Correct,
Mhm.
correct. What we're talking about is the measurement of coverage and setback requirements would be applicable to Golden Hind Passage. The extra 2% up to 4% applies to everybody, but if you're on Golden Hind Passage, you're going to get both. But you could take advantage of both if you needed.
So,
But it's only for uncovered decks. So you couldn't increase coverage in another way for my house, for instance. The provisions are only for purposes of constructing uncovered decks that are necessary to reach the new higher finished floor of the home, or are at the same level, I should say.
okay, so they could go all the way to the 5-yard the 5-yard rear setback,
Correct,
and it's exempt from lot coverage.
correct. So it's,
And only on Golden Hind's Passage.
yes,
Okay.
and a good way to think of it is that right now on Golden Hind Passage, if you raise your house and you want to have a deck 5 feet from the property lines, it can't be more than 3 feet in height. So this provision would allow that deck to be 5 feet in height. So we're essentially going to treat it the same way that we treat a deck that's 3 feet high on Golden Hind Passage. And the way we treat a deck that's 3 feet high is we say it doesn't count as coverage, and it needs to be a minimum of 5 feet from your rear property line.
Okay, got it.
And the deck, there's one small difference. And if I go backwards to the previous slide, you'll see that the raised deck is not allowed to, it has to have the same side yard setback as the main building. The 3-foot deck is 5 feet from side and rear, and the raised deck has to be building setback. So you can get 5 feet from the back, but if you have a 6-foot setback, you're going to be 6 foot.
I've got other questions later on. Thanks.
Okay, moving on.
Keep going, yeah.
Yep. So we've put some thought into, like I just talked about briefly, who this should apply to. And if the next slide, at the flood control board meeting in April, Chair Bundy and the flood board asked if the draft ordinance would apply to other waterfront parcels in Marina Village and Mariner Cove. And those streets are Harbor Drive, Seawolf Passage, Key Largo Cove, Key Largo Passage, Edgemar, Yolo, and Channel are in Village 2 with Harbor. And in consideration of this, I've provided some analysis in the staff report on how the proposed regulations could potentially apply to properties in the flood zone. The draft ordinance really contains 2 sets of regulations. The first one is the increase in maximum allowed coverage by an additional 2%. That's for everybody in the flood zone, whether you're in Madera Gardens or Mariner Cove. If you're in the flood zone and you raise your house for purposes of adding uncovered decks or what have you, you can utilize this extra now 4%. Currently 2, will go to 4. And the second set of standards is these modified deck location standards and modified measurement of coverage for elevated decks. And staff is recommending that apply to elevated bayfront homes on Golden Hind Passage, so the waterfront on Golden Hind Passage. Next slide. Here's a map of the parcels that it would apply to. There's 93 of them. It would apply to the odd number houses. The odd number houses are 1 through 331 Golden Hind Passage, as outlined in blue on this slide. And the intent here is to make this a simpler to understand for the end user and for property owners, whether or not this applies to them. If you're on the water edge on Golden Hind Passage, it would apply to you. You'd be able to take advantage of it if you needed to. Next slide. A further analysis of why it would be necessary for a Golden Hind Passage is that the elevation of those properties is low. It's lower than much of Mariner Cove, and it's lower than the further west in the subdivision on Key Largo and Passage and Edgemar and Seawolf and whatnot. This is the shoreline engagement effort elevation map, and the lighter colors or white is over 10 feet in elevation. Blue is very low. You can see Harbor and Echo are very low in elevation, but again, not on the water. And then on the far east side of Golden Hind is where we're really seeing lower elevation. And it's important to know that the lower elevation is meaningful because it leads to a higher finished floor elevation. These folks are seeing flooding in the street on a sunny day, and they're more motivated to raise their homes. And you're seeing a lot of people voluntarily raising their homes along Golden Hind Passage, particularly along the water. Next slide, please. Here's some data. This table provides a list of homes on Golden Hind Passage that have recently been elevated. It includes the amount that they were raised to what finished floor elevation, and then the height of decks that are attached to the home. And of these, there's 8 of them that are highlighted in green that include decks between 3 feet and 5 feet in height. And under the proposed regulations, these properties would be able to take advantage of this additional flexibility for lot coverage and setbacks. 3 of the homes included decks that were more than 5 feet in height, and a deck more than 5 feet in height is allowed today, but it does have to follow more stringent setback requirements, and it does count towards lot coverage. And that's 3 of those that are highlighted in blue that were exceeding 5 feet in height. There's one home that included a deck that's 2 foot 8 inches in height. That's less than 3 feet. So our existing regulations would permit this deck and would not count it towards lot coverage and would allow it to be 5 feet from the rear property line. And that's the yellow highlighted one. On this next slide, I'm showing the 4 waterfront homes that have been recently elevated on these other streets that I talked about.
Could you go back one slide?
Question about that slide?
So let's look at 323. They raised the house 4 feet, but the deck height's 6 feet 9 inches, so it's
Yep.
higher than the first floor, the new first floor elevation.
No, it's the amount that they raised it is relative to where the existing finished floor was. So you have grade down here, an existing finished floor, and they raised that 4 feet. So it's above grade by about 6'5" or so, and then a lot slopes down towards the water. So the decks get a little higher at their maximum highest point on the back of the lot, because the lots tend to kind of slope down. So you have these are not slab on grade homes for the most part. They have a crawl space and they have, a few steps up to them, the existing finished floor. So when they raise them, if they raise them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 feet, that doesn't mean they're only 5 feet in the air. It's relative to the existing finished floor, which is positioned above grade already. Does that make
So-
sense?
In that case, the deck would be at the finished floor level in that house?
That's correct.
Okay.
Okay.
All right, so this list is showing some of the homes that have been recently elevated on those other streets that I talked about, indicating they're all, for the most part, were waterfront. Creek front means along San Clemente Creek. And again, it shows the amount that they were raised, the finished floor elevation, and then the height of the attached decks. And there was one home here on 11 Harbor Drive, and it's highlighted in green, that would be eligible to take advantage or potentially would benefit from these proposed regulations. And 3 of the homes that have been raised included decks that are 3 feet or less in height. And these decks are adequately permitted by our existing zoning regulations. So, before expanding the second set of regulations, the ones that provide modified setbacks and modified way of measuring coverage to other waterfront areas, staff feels that we need to take a wait and see approach. This will allow us to collect some additional data as more property owners choose to raise their homes. Go to the next slide. We know there's a clear data set for Golden Hind Passage waterfront parcels. Their homes are elevated more frequently. The elevations of the lots are relatively low, which is leading them to elevate their homes to a higher finished floor, even exceeding what's required by the town, more than 1 foot above base flood elevation. And they're responding to flooding that they're experiencing on sunny days, whether it's a king tide or high tide, or in the winter storm surge. And the tidal intrusion and saltwater infiltration that some of these homeowners experience are making their raised decks more important to them, since they're less able to have landscaping or lower decks, because they can be covered in water and could be damaged by the water over time. And then the second factor that's informing our thoughts about the applicability of this is that there is limited data for these other waterfront parcels. There's fewer of them that have been elevated. Some of them sit at a higher elevation, and we've, in particular, those in the newer section of Marina Village along Yolo are, between 9 and 10 feet in elevation. And most of these homes we've observed can include decks. 3 out of the 4 recent ones could include decks that gave them full flexibility under our existing regulations. So that's kind of what we're thinking in terms of, to monitor and collect information and then revise if needed. We do anticipate that some sort of accommodation will be necessary in other areas of the flood zone on the east side and potentially on the west side. And we intend to continue to look at and collect information about people's projects and any barriers that they have, whether it's our development standards or other streamlining barriers that they might experience when they need to and keep track of it. And the last time that we modified our code to address some flexibility for elevating homes was August of 2024. And I think it's always important for us to collect sufficient data before we amend our regulations. With that, staff is recommending that the commission approve the draft resolution, and which would forward the ordinance that's included as Exhibit A to the town council for consideration. And I'm here for questions. I know our applicant is here if anyone has any questions specific to his property.
Thank you, Tracy. Before we get to the applicant and public comment, I'd like to get a little clarification and be sure that we understand and the public understands the difference between Golden Hind and the other parcels. You've talked about the base elevation of those lots. What are your fears, or what's the lack of information about those lots that you want more data about more specifically? I'm not sure I understand what you're looking for to gather information.
I think as more people choose to elevate their homes on these other streets, we'll have additional information on whether or not our existing regulations are adequate. We're talking about allowing people to have an extra 2 feet of height essentially in their backyard. And so far what we've observed is very limited, and most people are able to construct the decks that they desire at 3 feet and less in height. And so we'd like to know, be sure that additional modification in the convention is necessary as more folks are raising their homes over there, and to what height they're raising.
So that in many of those cases, you're saying even if they increase it to 11 or 11.5 or something like that, that they're still 3 feet above and they can go to within 5 feet of the rear property line. And they would-
Correct,
Yeah.
correct. So as an example, one that's under construction now is on Yolo Street. And in order to accomplish 11-foot NAVD, 11-foot finished floor, that's what's required. They're having to raise it a foot. And that puts their deck height at 1 foot 6 inches. So under our existing regulations, they can have a deck that is within 5 feet of their rear property line, and it does not count as lot coverage.
Got it.
That's what Claire's showing here, the examples that we have today.
So, yeah, there's no good basis to grant that blanket permission at this time. You really want to let that develop, let the seawaters come up and create more problems.
Yeah, and I think for the most part, the 3 that are there, 145 YOLO, 6 Seawolf, and 26 Channel started out as leveling their homes and raised them as part of that process, because you're already touching the foundation and so they decided to raise it. The one that's a substantial improvement is 11 Harbor, and they only went up to 11. So it'd be interesting to know if people are going to start doing what we see on Golden Line Passage and raising them higher, in which case that would be a good reason to extend these regulations to them, that they're wanting to go above base flood elevation and bases and decks kind of come up to. But for now, that they're all at sticking around 11. And again, it's limited really information with just the 4. We do think we'll see more over time.
Got it. All right. So, commissioners, further questions for staff? Daniel, do you have more questions for staff at this time?
I guess I'm still not clear about the difference in some of these changes between Golden Hind waterfront properties and the rest of the properties. So the 5-foot rear property line would apply to any property in this district or only the waterfront property?
The difference between what's allowed today and what is in the proposed draft ordinance is the height of the deck. So if you have a deck that's 3 feet or less in height, regardless if your home is raised or not, if it's 3 feet or less in height, it can extend as close as 5 feet to the rear property line and doesn't count as coverage. And what we're talking about is allowing that deck to be 5 feet in height and treating it the same way. It can be as close as 5 feet to the rear property line, and it doesn't count as coverage.
To any property in this area?
That would be along Golden Hind Passage on those 93 parcels.
Only Golden Hind Passage?
Correct.
Okay. the ability to build a deck in the front yard, in the front, that's 5 feet high. Why would we allow that?
Right now, we allow, we have two parameters for decks, relative to setbacks and required yards. A deck that's 3 feet or less can extend into your front yard. Any higher than that, it can only extend 6 feet. And the reason for that is you have, that's throughout Corte Madera and it would apply to a second story deck too. That second story deck may need design review ultimately, but a deck that's more than 3 feet in height can extend only 6 feet into the front yard. And we have many homes that are set above the street where they have a front porch, for instance. We may have someone who raises their house and that's their front landing. But it's fairly commonplace, I think, to see a deck or porch or what have you that exceeds 3 feet in height into the front yard. We have had this regulation for quite some time. It's not new, allowing it to project into the front yard at a raised deck.
And the height's not limited currently.
It's not limited, but it would require design review if it's 10 feet or more in height, and that is measured from grade to the deck surface. So there's sort of an allowed piece in there for decks in the backyard and in the front yard, and they can project off the building only 6 feet in the front yard or the backyard. And you don't need design review for them. You need to adhere to our lot coverage requirements for such a deck.
I'm sorry, what did you say about design review?
You need design review if the deck is 10 feet in height or more. We recently changed that from 15 down to 10 with the last design review. Just trying to capture second story decks really and doing design review for those.
I guess I'm somewhat concerned if someone raises the house 5 feet above grade, then the front yard deck is 5 feet above grade. Just the visual impact of that.
Let me see if I have a picture of one. Okay, I have one I can. Slide 32. And I think 31 also. I think I was going to bring it up. This is showing, I think their front deck is around 4 feet or so. And their stairs, and it extends into the front yard setback, not by much. And this house has been raised above base flood elevation. And that's the front porch there is, I would say it's doesn't appear to be designed to do anything other than provide access and maybe a small little area for plants or seed or what have you. And then the next slide shows one on Golden Hind Passage, where their front and their back decks were 6 feet in the air. And that's, I don't believe this one extends into the front yard setback, but this could, if they needed additional stairs, it could extend. And we do count the stairs, so that's kind of limiting the area that can project. With your stairs, as they come down, we're counting anything of those stairs that's over 3 feet as part of that projection that's allowed. Does that make sense? So you can, if you wanted to take this deck, for instance, and I want to push it out 6 feet into the front yard setback, where is your stairs going to be? So you bring it back so your stairs can come down off of the deck. So it's a little bit nuanced, I guess, in that way, if that makes sense, that the stairs are counted in the overall height of the deck. And so you have to set your deck back adequately enough so that your stairs can come down and not violate that 6 foot projection.
So someone who's not on Golden Hind waterfront frontage can or can't build a 5 foot deck within 5 feet of the rear property line?
They cannot.
Cannot.
If it's not on Golden Hind Passage, they would be limited to 3 feet in height.
So the major concession for those people is the additional 2% of lot
For
coverage?
everyone else, correct. They would get an additional 2%. But if they have very high decks, they would still, we would still be applying our existing setback requirements for everybody else or the raised deck. So they would be, because they're not on the water, they can utilize the step down design. And that's actually what the previous slide, this Mohawk property did. Because they're not having inundation from any flooding in the backyard. And that's seems to be working. Don't know if they would agree, but it seemed to be working regulation wise as far as not limiting their ability to include decks in their rear yard.
Yeah, I think, Peter, that's it for now.
Okay, I'm going to join on to what Daniel was asking on the next slide, 283 Golden Hind there. So who knows where the front of the house is relative to the property line? I don't know. And maybe it's a normal setback or it's right at the permitted setback requirement. So, and it looks like that's about a 7-foot height to that front entry.
I think
right
it's 6'9". I think that's about right.
there.
Yep.
So that would mean that a deck can never be higher than the finished floor, but it could extend out if it fell within the now added 4% lot coverage. No.
No, the front setback requirements are intact regardless of the height of your decks.
Got it.
So if this person has raised their house quite a good deal, and therefore their decks are they're more than 5 feet. I'm talking about proposed regulations. Their decks are more than 5 feet. So they would need to, they do count as lot coverage, and they would need to adhere to the front setback limitation for this deck.
Got it. Okay. Thank you.
Haven't seen a variance yet for this. That's your next question.
Got it. Okay. So over to my left over here, Margaret, are you quizzical here or do you have questions for staff?
It has actually, for the one that you're looking at, it underwent design review prior to our ordinance changes, and there was a screen added to the deck on one side. And that was at the request of the neighbor. For the most part, though, and it has been relayed by the applicant, it's unusual. You're the outlier if you haven't raised your house. And so your neighbors on either side are having a higher deck. And so everybody's following that same plan. And it's, I think, important to note that we do allow the presence of a deck, a raised deck that's 6 feet high or 10 feet high or second story even in the rear yard. It's got setback limitations and it counts as coverage. If we, you know, and that's where we came up with the threshold of 10 feet for design review, is because we'll see privacy impacts. And I think that may be some of the data we're collecting as a result of this ordinance change, is if anybody's asking for taller fences, for instance. Our limit on fences is 8 feet. Maybe that's here from property owners. They would like that to be increased. And when we brought this to the flood board, the response from the flood board was that that should be an accommodation that we ask our decision makers to make as well, if you're asked for it. Maybe the property owner can shed more light on privacy impacts for you.
Okay.
Jimmy, I've got a lot of questions. So in this case, they raised their property in a situation where the deck may be, if it was at finished floor, it'd be 6 feet above grade. So that deck would have to apply to our lot coverage ordinance, even if this extended, like, so what you're proposing wouldn't even be allowed here. If it was at
Correct. They would not be eligible to take advantage of the draft
This draft,
regulations because their deck exceeds 5 feet in height. Their
correct.
deck is allowed.
Yeah.
But then they would be utilizing this.
The
deck design.
4% or just,
Well, they may not need the 4%.
Yeah.
Their deck counts as coverage, and then maybe they need the 4%, maybe they don't.
okay,
And then that deck, because it's more than 5 feet in height over, under the
Okay.
proposed regulations, could only project 6 feet off the back. And then they would either
gotcha.
have stairs down or have a stairs to a lower deck that's 3 feet
Mhm.
less in height. For example,
Okay, and, I got it. And then the measurement is taken at the edge of the deck at the highest point of the deck. So if the deck, just assume that everything's sloping down to the water, which it should be, that would be the highest point of the deck.
Yep.
And is Madera Gardens in flood zone AE the same as this flood zone?
yes,
So it's the same flood zone.
the flat areas, I think there's some hilly areas of Madera Gardens. Ash that are not.
Okay. But
All the
it's,
flat birch, Mohawk, Winona.
so we we didn't categorize that as a different tidal zone flood area as far as, because we've got locks and things that are protecting Madera Gardens, which is sort of a different area and
Yeah.
concern in a way, because we can control the flooding over there.
Yeah, there's pump system and a living.
Mhm.
So flood zoning. Same regulations apply to them in terms of substantial improvement.
Now, here's a big question. How do you determine the rear setback in a tidal zone?
From the property line.
No, but
It's a size parcel.
I'm sorry, not necessarily the rear property line. Well, some of these property lines go way into the water.
Yeah,
So how do you determine 5 feet from?
it's a line in the water. It's not a line on land, it's in the water. And
How does that get surveyed? No, I'm serious.
well, they start on land and they say you got this much to go, and
Oh, so they start at the front yard setback.
they start on a marker and they can say, you can go this far from here into the water. But you're right. I mean, you can't measure from a line sitting in the water. They have to measure from land and go out there. Yeah.
So that brings me, I asked that question wrong. So the net area is based on the land that is not in the tidal area.
Correct.
Right.
We still.
So that's kind of a crazy,
in
how do you
R1,
determine
yeah,
that?
exclude any area to NAVD unless,
Okay, so
so that usually
you
ends
just
up
gotta
being
use the map.
somebody's boat dock or it clips the edge
Yeah.
of their property. And we do the same thing for lagoons on the other side of town.
Mhm.
That's water also.
they just take the
Better.
flood map from FEMA and figure out where that line is and,
Yeah, or we have a surveyor involved if
Mhm.
if there's one on the team, if they're raising the house. Or there's some other tools we can look at the county level that provide elevation contours for staff that we can use to evaluate whether there's whether the gross area of land is reduced.
and all the lagoon pretty much stays at the same elevation year round unless it's drained.
No, they raise and lower it a little bit.
Yeah, it goes up and down. Yeah.
Just a little bit.
And there's we won't go into that.
Okay. I'm sure there's a bunch of stuff. That's all I have, Tracy. Thanks.
Okay, just a couple of quick things. There used to be a map that showed all of the floor elevations of all the homes on Golden Height. Has that been a part of your study? There used to,
Where is such a thing?
yeah. It was presented some time ago and it said, this one's at 8, this one is at 8, 5, 9, and they had identified that. So somewhere that exists, a roadmap of the known floor elevations. Okay. And, the general plan encourages, keeping the housing stock viable. You've quoted that in here. This is sort of a step in making sure these homeowners don't lose more value on their property. You guys envision anything else coming along to help solidify these properties for value and viability down the road? No. That's
That's a good question. I mean, this is something that was brought up to us after our design review regulations. And one thing we were trying to do in the design review regulations was to streamline the process to raise homes. And so this is, and although this was a private application, this is something that we see as a continuation of the regulations to help alleviate the issues for those that have just floodwater inundation due to tidal events and storm events. I will say one of the other follow-up items to our shoreline engagement effort was to look into grant money from FEMA. So we're continuing to look into that to see if there's other ways that we can help homeowners raise homes without having to do it privately. There's other communities that do have those FEMA grant programs. But other than that, it's really more of an infrastructure review of our shoreline neighborhoods and not so focused on the individual homeowners themselves.
right. Okay. Thank you, guys. Want to just comment and say the graphics are great. You had on screen. I don't know who's responsible for those graphics, but they're great graphics you brought to the screen. So let's open it up for public comment. Okay, okay, go ahead, Daniel.
So there's a reference to possible BCDC jurisdiction. So what are the odds that we approve this zoning change and now BCDC comes back and wants to doesn't find it to be it finds that under their jurisdiction, this is not allowed?
We did meet with them and they don't have any concerns with the proposed ordinance as it relates to the change in height of decks. And we're not talking about any new footprint for decks, since it's allowed to be 3 feet in height. We're talking about the height. They didn't have any concerns with that.
Okay, good. And does the building code require the decks be open and not enclosed?
Yeah, go ahead. You were just saying that they can't be enclosed, right?
Enclosed meaning just having a railing around.
Underneath the deck?
Oh, underneath.
Which would affect the flow of flood water?
They're open. I haven't seen any that are enclosed, except for we're very steep hillsides where they have to do something for shear wall purposes. But I haven't seen them enclosed underneath all in the flood zone to date.
But you don't know if it's a building code issue or not?
I don't know if it would be building code, but I know FEMA does have some rules around what obstructs floodwater. But I'm not familiar. That's something we'd have to get back to you on.
Okay. That's it, Peter.
Right. Just in response, it would show up if on the building plan, if they were going to submit for that, and that would be reviewed.
Minimum flood vent requirements on the foundation. So I'd expect if somebody proposed to, enclose the underside of the deck that there would at minimum.
It wouldn't be a deck anymore.
Yeah. I haven't seen it yet. And we would evaluate that as whether or not that was floor area as well. So somebody starts putting walls around things, come up on floor area issues with that design.
All right. Okay, Jim.
Sorry,
No, it's-
it just brought up.
Yeah.
So does the railing need to be semi-transparent? It can't be a solid wall.
We don't regulate the design of the railing. If they wanted it to be glass or a post design or.
I mean, could it be a wall is what I'm saying? Because like any deck, you could enclose it. I'm just curious because that would be a big visual impact.
Yeah, I think Public Works, building department's looking at that as far as is the railing meet building code height and pounds per square inch pressure on it and whatnot. And Public Works is going to look at whether or not you're affecting any flow of water.
He's talking about deck above for the railing height.
The deck and the railing, can that be solid wall? So if we're talking about someone doing a whole like big deck in their backyard, you could have a deck that's 5 feet tall with a railing that's that's an 8-foot
No,
thing.
no, it could be a 42-inch rail and that's it. They can't build a 6-foot wall on top of their deck.
There's definitely views that,
No, what I'm
Or-
saying is you're 5 feet above, open underneath. From the deck to the handrail, whatever height, can that be solid in our planning code?
we don't specify. It's silent as to whether what that railing is made
Mhm.
of and whether it's solid or not solid. There are views for all these properties directed out to the water, and that may be why we're not really seeing that at all on decks, is because people are, they won't capture in a view.
Yeah, the only reason I ask is because if you've got a neighbor that's lower, someone goes all the way out there and they're in their backyard and they try to look that way, they're going to be looking at someone's solid wall and not through something transparent.
Yeah.
Which could become an issue if we don't, kind of address something like that. I've seen ordinances where they require it to be, if it's a large structure, to be semi-transparent.
I think that's one thing we were thinking of, is just the privacy impacts of having the raised decks on potentially a neighbor that has a lower deck. So in one way, yes, you'd have an obstructed view and you'd see a wall, but also that is going to protect privacy from someone moving over your backyard. But Tracy suggested we could amend the code, proposed code, to address that if you'd like.
Well, I mean, I would propose it, but we'll see how the other commissioners would react to it, but.
Right. Ordinarily, it doesn't get reviewed in a deck application unless it shows up as such. And would there be a review of that solid rail in a deck application?
Yes, the railing is included in the deck application.
Right.
The building division does that, and that's something that we look at different things than the building division does all the time.
Right.
That's,
So-
if that was a part of ordinance, we would specify what is the design.
They don't get it by right, so they have to submit for it and then you review it. So that's part of staff review of that.
If our ordinance specified some type of railing, we would review the railing. If the ordinance does not specify some type of railing, then they would apply for what they apply for, and it would need to meet building code requirements. Does that explain? Answer your question?
And right now, it doesn't say that.
That's correct.
Okay. Okay, go ahead, Margaret.
A clarification of what this is. Right now, this ordinance is just the deck. It isn't handrails, guardrails, anything like that. Is that right?
It's silent on what the guardrails and handrails are, what their design is.
Okay, so what's the regulation about the height of the handrails or guardrails now?
It's per building code requirements, and it's a minimum of 42-inch guardrail on a deck. There's other parameters like how strong it is and pressure you can put on it, but it's all building code prescriptive, objective review of the rail.
So 42 inches off the floor of the deck.
That's correct.
And that's the limit?
That is the minimum.
Oh, that's a minimum. What's the maximum?
I don't believe there's a maximum.
So that would be staff review, anything over required. So they can't just say, we want to put a 6-foot railing up. They can't just do that. They have to ask for that.
Well, I wouldn't have an ability to restrict that railing if there's nothing code that says it cannot be more than 42 inches, for instance.
And that's applicable to any deck anywhere.
Correct. And we are seeing people choose to install a higher guardrail on the side. And the one example that I gave at the neighbor's request was to install a screening fence at the top of the deck.
Right.
For privacy reasons.
Okay. So I do see that as a problem with possible view problem.
We
I
can
think it's probably a separate issue from
Yes.
talking about now.
I think it is, because that regulation doesn't exist now. So people could do some kind of wall now. But I think Tracy's got a good point that this ordinance is really just Golden Hind Passage on the water
Right.
and most of the time people are trying to maximize the view. So it may happen on the side to mitigate privacy impacts, but it's probably unlikely. And one of the goals is to, in general, reduce the impact of design review and the process of design review on people needing to raise their homes. So we could put some standards in the code for purposes of the raising of the decks for this. But it wouldn't have, I don't think we could apply it globally to the area. And so I think it is something that would have to be reviewed separately from this. Because this is really just isolated to just this section of homes on Golden Hind Passage. So even if we were to put something in, it'd be isolated just to this bit.
Because when we looked at that home on Channel Drive, that had the, not the ADU, but it was short-term rental, that situation. Those people looked out, but their view was this way. And had that person put up a tall guardrail or whatever, that would have been their only view obstructed, because the channel there is, it's just that, it's a channel. And what you want is to look out to the bay, sort of. So maybe we need to think about that in the future.
I'm going to comment on this, just looking at the photographs in the book, and that many of those properties have 6-foot fences on the property line. A number of them do. The decks are just in the side setback from those 6-foot fences. So in many cases, there's already sort of a fence there, but I think they're used to that fence along the property line being 6 foot, but if the deck is up higher, it could be a viewpoint. Okay, so that's a separate issue. Yeah.
I definitely think if it was specific to this, the reason I brought it up is because, these lots all have different decks, and if someone winds up really building a huge deck, it could, as long as things were transparent as far as like pickets, or I'm sure that's what they're going to build anyway. But if it isn't in the code and you got neighbors that don't like each other or something, someone could put Tracy said they could put a 5-foot wall up there and then open underneath and block someone's peripheral kind of.
All right,
All right, we can talk about that. Sorry.
we'll move on, and we'll let this gentleman speak here as a part of public comment. So please step up to the microphone. Thanks for waiting.
Of course. Good evening. Thank you for having me, and thank you for having this meeting tonight. I recognize and appreciate that this is the only agenda item for tonight, so I appreciate everybody being here to talk about it and to hear it. I'll just briefly reintroduce myself to the commission. My name is Eric Bitzo, and along with my wife Teal and our 3-year-old daughter Lily, we live at 299 Golden Hind Passage and are the applicants for the proposed changes that are before you this evening. We have lived in the Mariner Cove neighborhood for about 5 years now, and I may have said this last time, but our goal is to be there forever. And that's what this is about, not just for us, but for our community. It's about sustainability, flood mitigation, climate adaptation, safety, and our ability to protect our existing property. Things that I think are fair to say go to the core goals of the town. As some of you may recall, I was here last December and spoke to you all. And at that point, we were just asking really to support and get on the town's staff's work plan for the upcoming year, with the hopes that it would be addressed in the near future. So during that meeting 6 months ago, I think I mentioned that the tidal flooding and the water incursion was getting noticeably worse each year. And sure enough, about a month after I spoke to you all, we experienced what we now understand was roughly an 8.5-foot tide. And it was really just the result of a standard high tide plus a windstorm that brought up storm surge of a couple feet. Our deck was completely submerged, and as I think Tracy put in the report that she presented to you all, it's reflected at page 5 of that report and was reflected in the slide this evening. Our lower deck was completely submerged by a number of inches, and that was, again, just a few months ago. Our home came the closest it's ever come to flooding, and our home is about 9.5-foot nav. And FEMA's flood level is 10 or plus 1 if you're going to lift your house. So that's all to say that this matter has now become far more urgent for us, and it's why, even though we had already been working closely with Amy and Tracy on bringing this issue to the forefront, we quickly contacted them about becoming an applicant and partnering with them in the town to address this issue quickly, not just for us, but for other homes that are similarly situated. And we think that the resulting proposal before you is, frankly, a great example of what makes Corte Madera an exceptional place. We've had this issue develop in relatively quickly within our experience being here. And what's been presented to you is the result of partnership and efficiency, and in our view, action that meets the moment, but is also targeted and very narrowly tailored to only apply to these impacted properties. The proposal succeeds in addressing what we are facing in the community, being on the front lines of flooding and climate change, and removes the unintended roadblocks that are acting to discourage and prevent people from raising their homes and getting their structures out of the water, where our decks plainly will not last. The core component of the proposal, as Tracy explained, is both simple and straightforward. It's an extra 2 feet of flexibility for decks that are attached to raised homes, given that there can be 2 feet or more of water in our backyards at any given time. And as I'm sure know, this is predicted to worsen and become even more regular as a result of climate change. And at the way it stands right now, the planners have no discretion to help us and permit projects. Getting decks above 3 feet as required to get them out of the water. As Tracy said, they're easily going to trigger lot coverage requirements, setback requirements. And as we explored early on, a variance is just not possible because it's a symptom that we in the community on this side of the street that we all face. And so it's not even something that can meet the criteria for a variance. The other thing I just want to emphasize is something else that Tracy said, which is the importance of decks to our community. And we did hear this recently expressed at the flood board meeting by flood board members. And that's because decks provide the only usable space in our backyards, as I think you saw in some of the pictures that Tracy showed. So the deck is just vital to our ongoing ability to enjoy our homes. And this is, again, a function of the seawater incursion that we experience. And again, that is getting worse. I think to answer some of your questions, our backyards are largely on top of marsh. So even when the tide is out, we're still effectively marshland back there. Our backyards within our property lines are still soggy messes, for lack of a better word. And our decks, sit on top of them right now. But when their water comes up, our decks are sitting on even just a normal high tide without storm surge. The underlying structures of our deck are sitting in water for many, many hours at a time, often multiple times a day. I did want to quickly address some of the concerns we just heard about privacy from Commissioner Bandel and I think others. We are, we're not a raised house technically because our house is not above 10-foot nav. I think I said earlier, it's roughly 9.5 feet right now. And we are the lowest of our string of neighbors. I think out of like 6 or 7 or so houses in our row, we are the only one that's not raised above the FEMA level. So right now, pretty much everybody's got decks that at least to some level, or at least some extent, are 5 feet or higher. So everybody can look down into everybody's yards. Fences are essentially worthless at this point, right? Because you can sit out on your backyard deck that's already above 5 feet, look into your neighbor's yard if you want. Privacy in this area, it's just different. And I think we all have different expectations. You know, you can't live a community with raised homes and think that nobody's going to be able to look into your yard. On issues like view obstruction, I think just the way that the homes are situated, as Amy was saying, the view is straight out back, right? And most of our properties are wide enough so that if the concern is solid railings on the side, those aren't going to be view obstructing of where the water is, right? Because the view, everybody's looking out towards the water. So certainly from the front part of the railing that looks out, I mean, I'm not aware of anybody that has a solid rail there. But just overall, in terms of privacy concerns, again, you know, I think if we're thinking about it certain ways, we're just really restoring the way things were many years ago before everybody started raising their homes. And so right now we're down, you know, down in a ditch in a sense, and everybody's sitting above us. And if we raise our home, we're essentially just bringing things back to the equilibrium that existed, you know, before everybody started raising their homes. So, and again, this is also something that's been talked about at the flood board meetings, and I know Amy's talked about it, but the privacy expectations in this community are just different. And I think they have to be, because we have to be able to raise our homes in order to sustain the.
Anything else you want to add to this? You've had well past our normal comment session, but you may be the only one, so I've let you go. So
Sure, I
anything-
appreciate that. I'll just wrap it up real quick. The only thing I'd stress is that we just don't have any other options. And I know Amy touched on this a bit, but there are no larger community-based options to address the flooding that we're experiencing. There have been discussions about seawalls and berms and levees, and all of those options not only remain controversial, but really in the early exploration stages. I mean, I think you're probably looking at closer to 10 years before, at a minimum, before anything like that is built. So the only options we have right now to protect our property is to raise the structures, get them out of the water. That's all we're really trying to do.
Yes. Thank you.
Happy to address any questions you all have before I sit down.
No, I think we'll let you sit down.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you.
All right. Okay. Is there anybody online?
Yeah, we have one hand. I see Kirk. Oh, your hand went down, Kirk. Oh, it's back up. I'm going to allow you to unmute yourself when you're ready.
Hi, yes, this is actually Kirk Miller, and I'm Sachi Itagaki. I'm a member of the Flood Board. I live at 323 Golden Hind, and I just wanted to kind of support. We have raised our house, but you know, this may be something that we might consider in the future as we look at, you know, some of the other decks in the yard. And we just want to support this proposed, I guess, modification to code. I think it's something that, you know, everybody along kind of that Golden Hind fringe might encounter in future years. And so I think I want to echo what Eric just said also, that any long-term neighborhood solution is very much in the, you know, at probably 15 plus year time horizon. So, you know, those of us who are able to have gone ahead and raised our homes to provide ourselves that, you know, kind of protection against events that are happening now, probably, you know, several times a year already. So thank you.
Thank you.
And that's it.
All right. Thank you. So we'll then close the public comment section of this. We'll bring it back here for discussion amongst the commissioners here. Do you guys have any further questions you want to ask staff before we make a statement about whether we can make the findings for this? No. Okay. So with that said, we have discussed adding something to the ordinance, but I think that would be a separate issue for the town staff to bring to us, or to create a separate ordinance about deck rails and that kind of thing.
They were saying they could add it to this particular, not globally.
Right.
If we would like to do that.
Okay, so we can take that up if everybody feels that that's something that could be done to here. I don't know exactly how we would word it, but we could talk about that. It would be just for this ordinance. And then that would be a problem for other deck construction in the town, I think. But because we'd be granting that or making a specific statement about decks here, but it would allow still the other decks in town to do whatever they want. So if you feel that that's important, let's talk about, say, height, construction of the rail, solid or not. I think this gentleman spoke to the fact that it's not really something people seem to want to do out there, but it doesn't mean somebody wouldn't do it. Daniel, your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I think it's an issue that's worth exploring. I guess I would have one question for the staff, which is where would this sit? Bringing something back to us on this issue, where would that sit in your priorities? But I would, before you answer, I would say that I wouldn't support doing it just for this Golden Hind area. I just think if it's an issue, it's an issue everywhere in town, and I don't think we should single this out.
Yeah. Okay.
It would certainly be something we would have to review. And then the council provides us directions on priority. After you all discuss the design review ordinances and all the work that Tracy and Phil put into that effort, there were some other things that we had on our list to review, such as the findings. There's other things to touch on in that design review world of regulations. So this could be part of that effort. But I will say this year, and most likely next year, we definitely have our work cut out for us for a lot of the state requirements. And so I think it would be more maybe 2027 when we would have the capacity to be able to work on that, and that we would feel confident asking the council for prioritization.
So I guess a follow-up question would be, in the past, has this been an issue with neighbors, with a neighbor putting a 6-foot, railing or wall along their deck?
No, and I'd say on the contrary, we've seen neighbors decide that they are being requested to include it for privacy reasons rather than objecting to its presence for view reasons. We've not identified that as an issue.
Okay. So that would be like saying we foresee an issue that hasn't been an issue yet. Is that what that says?
Yes.
I'll put this to bed in a second, but this is going to be put probably in the ordinance as kind of an exception to this code, right? And then you've got to have the guidelines for the exception. Correct? For the special flood zone AE, you'll probably put this as an exception to that specific zoning, right? You're going to go, and the reason I ask is because in those exceptions, you'll probably be putting all of the standards for it. And the only reason I brought up the whole solid wall thing is because these particular decks are unprecedented because they could go for 30 feet in the backyard. It's not just like a 6-foot deck. This, if we're talking about all the 5 feet from the rear property line, could go really far out there if someone decided to do their whole backyard in a deck. That's why I bring up, because it's a very specific situation, which I'm assuming is going to be a exception to this specific zoning.
Well, under our existing regulations, first of all, a 3-foot high deck can go 30 feet. So
That's fine, but
Yep.
you know,
And then
if
we're
it's
talking
30
about-
feet, 30 inches, you don't even need a guardrail,
correct.
right? So what I'm saying is you only need you only need to start to have a guardrail when they get a little bit higher. So that's, you go to a 5-foot deck, now you have to increase it by the guardrail. It starts to get a little bit different. That's why I brought it up. But if the other commissioners don't think it's a big deal, I mean, you could have a deck all the way out to here.
That's the deck at 5 foot would be still limited to the 4% rule.
Mm-mm.
No.
No, we go all the way out to that, saying 5 feet all the way out.
Well, I guess We see decks of varying heights time, and the point at which we can control things like view blockage or privacy is deck that's 10 feet height everywhere else in Corte Madera. That helps to know.
Okay. Sorry.
No, it's fine.
I interrupted someone's.
Not at all. I
think
think that, this, I think that we have to hear from Margaret here about what her thought about trying to add something to this would be as well. Regarding the height of the deck railing.
I just look at this and the limited location that it would apply to as basically allowing people to make their backyard usable.
Mhm.
Because even if only a lower deck is flooding, it's still
Yeah.
it's
Right.
not usable, and it's almost a danger.
Mhm.
And so I don't have any problem with adding this to as an ordinance, because it is so limited in area of people that it would affect. And it literally gives them, a way to use their property. I don't have any problem with it. If we wanted to expand it, I think it would take a lot more looking at different designs and what might or might not happen. I don't think, I think in the meantime, people want to get on with it, and we definitely want to encourage making things viable for rising tides and flooding, and I could approve it.
Okay. All right, so I would agree that this is something that should be put on the staff work plan down the road, and not try to glom onto this for the railing, solid railing part. I think it needs permutations figured out by staff. That's my thought about it.
Okay. What do you guys think about extending this to the rest of this particular neighborhood? Because there's not that many properties left. They're actually on the coastal.
What do you mean?
Well, if you look at the map, I mean, the properties that are actually on the coastal flood area where there's not that much left. So why would we not just extend it to the whole neighborhood? Because it seems like, let's make the whole neighborhood the test pilot.
Like you mean to Channel and YOLO and that area?
Correct. I mean, it's the title. It's not the.
So Claire, could you pull up that FEMA map that had that on there?
Yeah, I think it's somewhat different. In my mind, it's somewhat different because here, if you're within 5 feet of the property line on the water, you're not facing another house. If you're back in the neighborhood and everybody builds a 5-foot deck, 5 feet from the property line, you now have 2 5-foot decks, 10 feet apart. So I think this really is an exceptional area in that regard. And maybe in the future, if flood things change, maybe that's an issue, but it also seems that many of those homes are already just a foot or so above the required flood elevation, so they're not likely to raise their house 5 feet.
If I may, Chair Chase,
Yes.
just to note that we did not notice this zone change beyond what we recommended. So if we were to expand this effort, we would have to renotice that and bring it back to you. We really thought carefully about Bob Bundy's comments from the flood board and really feel like this is the targeted area for the expanded decks, primarily due to the elevation and due to, as Dan mentioned, the proximity to the bay and just the reduction of impacts related to it just being this section of town.
Got it. Yeah. And I think it's a starter area, right? Understand how this plays out rather than just globally or adding more areas that are higher, slightly higher in elevation.
Yeah, and as Tracy noted, just doing the review of the homes that were raised, there are no decks above that 3 feet that really required this this level of assistance. It's really just this Golden Hide Passage area.
Right, okay.
I would say just, I attended the flood board workshop on this issue, and I think the staff did a really good, there were some of them that did think it should be extended to the whole area. I think the staff did a really good job of differentiating that, providing some relief in the other areas, but the most of the relief here is along the waterfront, and I support that. So I could support this resolution.
Does that address your thought, Jim? About expanding the resolution?
You know, I'm not that big on spot zoning, so this sort of,
But this is a problem that has been
but it's not, I
identified.
mean, I'll definitely approve this as it is. I just think that I'm trying to alleviate some work in the future. It just seems to me that there's not that much left in the neighborhood, and they are on the title. So, but.
Yeah. And
if-
Channel Drive and Yellow will probably get incorporated, but Tracy has said that they will see how this plays out and what the impact.
And then when you get to Harbor, they're even lower than the rest of them, and that's on the title. Right?
So I think one question, if you look at the shoreline adaptation engagement effort elevation map, on where do you draw the line?
Well, these guys are lower than these guys. On the water.
If it's okay, Chair Chase,
Yes.
I did talk to the Public Works Director a little bit about the applicability of these regulations. And while Harbor Drive is very low, it does have a berm along the inside of it that for now
Oh,
is protected.
okay.
Would,
Oh, the berm is on the title
on-
side?
it's on the San Clemente Creek side, and
Okay.
it is close to overtopping in the future. They will be looking closely at that, and so I think I did include the staff report that
Okay.
we'll be collecting data as more people in that area choose to elevate their homes. And then I think we can say we anticipate some sort of accommodation, and I think to determine what that should be requires some more information on what their needs are in that community. Whether these regulations for Golden Hind are appropriate there or not remains to be seen.
So the pump station is keeping them dry at the moment.
And additionally, the berm. So we do have a small grant related to that berm that we're hoping to keep in light of federal issues. But that is the focus based on the shoreline engagement effort, is to fortify that berm. And but I just will say that we're using a lot of data to justify why it's only this area. And Jim is correct that we try to future-proof as much as we can, but we think it'll be quite a number of years before other areas really need this level of assistance. So it's somewhat unique, but so I understand the concern about spot zoning in a way, because we had that concern as well, but this isn't really meeting the definition of spot zoning.
I know, I just
But-
using that word because I didn't have a better word. And if someone were down the creek that wanted to do this, would it become a variance? Or could they apply for a variance, or does that become a same situation as the applicant?
I think we would probably have the same take that there's not uniqueness to that particular property. It's the whole area that's the same. And our existing regulations would allow sort of the two-tier deck design if that was all that was an option for them. But based on what we're seeing, as far as the homes that have been elevated, they're going up a foot, 1.5, 2 feet. Our existing regulations appear to be accommodating them for now. And there's so few of them that have raised their homes. Not enough information. Is 5 feet what they need, or should it be 4, for example? Give the best information to decision makers so that we don't have unintended consequences somewhere.
All right, well, thank you for that. I'm going to say, let's ask for a motion here to approve this.
Make a motion that the planning commission adopt resolution number 25-006. Resolution of the planning commission of the town of Corte Madera recommending that the town council adopt amendments, Title 18 zoning of the Corte Madera Municipal Code to 1, allow additional flexibility related to lot coverage and setbacks for the uncovered decks 3 to 5 feet in height in the rear yard. This is limited to decks on Golden Hind Passage and adjacent to the bay. And 2, increase lot coverage by 2% for all residential parcels in the special flood hazard area in the R1 medium density residential zone.
And there's a second over here.
Second,
Okay. Thank you. Let's have a roll call, please.
Commissioner Bandel,
yes.
Commissioner Kinney,
Yes.
Vice Chair Rizzo,
Yes.
and Chair Chase.
Yes.
And Commissioner Beshoyer absent.
Okay, so there's nothing else to say about this particular resolution. It's going to go directly to council for their review. Great. All right, thank you, sir. All right. So, there was a meeting that Margaret was at last week. Would you care to fill us in on that meeting?
Okay, it was a town council meeting. The first thing that was, I thought, of note was a presentation by Chris Logan, who is on the County of Marin, from the County of Marin. Presentation was it's kind of a funny name, I thought. Rooted in Marin, rooted in Marin County, is basically what it was. And this is it was a countywide, rooted in Marin anti-displacement report, which I didn't quite understand why it was named anti-displacement, but anyway, Amy introduced the speaker and had been active, I think, in producing or in the community development agency that produced the report. It was a countywide project, and the purpose of the project was to educate and facilitate program and policy implementation around the problem of displacement, which is, I took to mean homelessness. No, I'm being corrected. Would you say something?
Yeah, anti-displacement is a term in housing policy, and it really means to preserve housing units for a variety of different areas of the community. Mostly it's targeted at preserving homes that house low-income populations, but it can also be housing seniors. And so the report was looking at, on a countywide basis, to review the data of the population decline and who was it that was leaving, who was getting displaced, why were they leaving, and then what policies, strategies are possible for jurisdictions to reduce that impact. So what they found is, and a lot of this I think you know, is that 64% of our workforce comes from outside the county, and that the population decline that we experienced in the last few years, most of that decline were members of our community that make $75,000 or less. And so it's the workforce that's leaving. And a lot of that is as homes turn over, get rehabbed, they have price increases. It's also just, losing apartment complexes or small, kind of that missing middle income factor of our homes. So it's looking at the existing homes that we have, and then the lack of affordability that's being built. And so it's really driving population to leave as rents increase. And so that's displacing people basically. So the goal is anti-displacement. So, and then preserving the units, and then having more programs in place to protect renters and keep them here.
the numbers were interesting that were talked about. And one thing that they did say that I remember, Marin County has the third highest rental rates in the Bay Area in the state. So, then they talked about, or Mr. Logan talked about policy options that came out of this work, and they talked about proactive code enforcement. In other words, when something is going wrong, don't wait for the person to complain about it because they could face negative sort of reactions from landlords. So proactive code enforcement would be more important. Tenant habitability plans, relocation assistance, or the right to return after a renovation or redevelopment of a property, rent stabilization, and legal support if needed. And it was an interesting report, but it did apply to not specifically to Corte Madera, but to the entire county.
There was data specific to Corte Madera within that. I will say it was a goal of our housing element to review the data, and a lot of the policy strategies are within our housing element, and we're being asked to consider those things as well.
And then there was a first reading and possible introduction of an ordinance to the fire code to designate a moderate fire hazard severity zone in Corte Madera. So right now, apparently there's only a very high zone, and the state CAL FIRE has created maps for the Bay Area showing things that or areas that were not at the very highest of severity levels. But what they did say is that severity zones the maps that were produced reflect hazards, not the risks, which apparently is a big distinction. So hazards are based on physical conditions that create a likelihood and expected fire behavior over a 30 to 50-year period without any consideration of measures that an area might take, such as fuel reduction or home safety measures. So CAL FIRE had to create these maps, and they were supposedly, they're supposed to show, they do show what local areas are responsible for in fire protection. And also the maps updated to include moderate and high hazard zones in addition to these very high zones. So the updated maps identify these new zones and also are for the areas not covered by state or federal fire services. One question that was asked by the council was that would these new zones that are created affect insurance rate and the insurance rates? And the answer was that it was not expected to. That was the best answer that was given. I guess they don't really know. But anyway, this was just the first read through. And unfortunately, the fire chief wasn't able to attend. So that the people, it was Adam and Vice somebody.
Chris Jewell, he's a fire.
Yeah, who answered the questions as best they could. Those are the two main parts of the.
Yeah, well, I was very interested in that housing thing. That was very enlightening as to what's happening economically with people at risk. Very good. Thank you, Margaret. Daniel has a meeting to report on that was April 11th.
April 15th.
15th.
Which little, maybe not very timely, but there were some interesting things. The first business item was considering purchased a below market rate unit from Marin Housing. It was a condominium. And they were offering it at the town for $255,000. And the market rate value was about $1 million. And the town council considered it, would be considering it for affordable housing in Corte Madera. And the council decided not to take advantage of this opportunity, partly because they were concerned about the town's economic situation going forward with, potential drop in sales tax revenue. And also they felt that the town really wasn't prepared yet for this to manage a property like this. They have a property manager and all the things that are involved in running a housing program. So they passed on that. The other one was the town manager looking to have a 5-year lease at One Tam Ridge for a intergenerational center. And there was a lot of people supporting that, have been working on it for years, and the council authorized the town manager to continue negotiation for that space. And hopefully bring back a firm agreement for that. And then there was a public hearing. Actually, as the first item was a public hearing, updating, establishing building and planning fees. And I don't know, Amy, if there's any newer information, but the staff had recommended a 2-tier process, $500 if appeal was made and it was to staff decision, and then $3,100 if it was a decision going to town council. And there was a lot of discussion about what does it really cost for the town, and at the current $300 rate at the time, it would cost, I don't know, it's over $3,000 of staff time and council time and so forth. So the council just felt like, well, people should be able to appeal, and the money shouldn't be such a detriment. And that if the town had to subsidize it somewhat, given that there aren't that many appeals, it was worth it. So they had proposed a 2-tier process, also 500 if it was a staff appeal and 1,000 if it was going to council. And I don't know, Amy, is there an update on that?
No, that was the latest. So it is $500 for an appeal and of administrative decision. And I think it was $1,500 for an appeal from planning commission to council.
And the other 2 items were some public works items, allowing public works director to have on-call services from a variety of consultants, so they wouldn't have to do an RFP for everything that came up, and that was authorized. So that was that, Amy.
I think that the town is getting the move forward with the age-friendly Corte Madera lease at this point. They've got the money now to do that. So that move forward. And I think that let me see that agenda for a sec. We have something else. It came out of all that. No, thank you. All right. My memory is wandering on that subject. So Amy, do you guys have anything you want to tell us about?
Yeah, just a couple things. I'm glad that Commissioner Kenny brought up the fee update, because I wanted to just update you on that appeal fee, since that was something that you all had discussed quite a bit and the council had discussed it their first meeting, and we provided some policy options to them for that meeting where they did the adoption. And so also just informationally related to the REI store at the town center, I'm sure you're aware, but it's sometimes tricky to decipher when we approve things administratively and when things come to you as far as design review and signage. And so REI has proposed some exterior modifications that are really just related to paint color, no additional signage. So we did make the determination that we can approve this at staff level. So just wanted to inform you of that. And if you want to reach out to us, we can give you the specifics on color and what the project entails. And then, as I'm sure you're aware, the 240 Tamil Vista project was appealed and will be heard tomorrow evening. I do just want to note that if you do choose to come and speak, just make sure that you're speaking as an individual and not as a commissioner. But you're of course welcome to come and listen and speak on that item. And that's all I have to report. That's tomorrow evening. Oh, and one more thing. As you're probably also aware, Commissioner Rizzo or Vice Chair Rizzo has decided not to reapply for the Planning Commission seat. That application period closed on Friday. Chair Chase did reapply. And we have one additional applicant that we know of. And so we will be setting up those interviews. And if the other applicant did apply for multiple other boards, so if we do continue to have a vacancy, we will advertise, do an additional advertisement and recruitment.
Yeah, the press hasn't happened, but he's already committed to other things. So, okay.
I had one item from staff,
Oh, yeah.
from the commission. So I attended the economic report for Marin County along with a number of the planning staff.
Yeah.
And if anybody's interested in borrowing this or even taking it, it's pretty interesting. We could pass it along.
Oh, I actually have copies for all of you.
Well, you do.
I do. So
Okay.
I can go get those after our meeting.
This is interesting. Yeah. Yeah, yeah, would love to have that. Yeah. Okay. And I see that we're going to have a revisitation with 800 Corte Madera Avenue at the next hearing.
The next hearing is reserved for that continued meeting related to 800 Corte Madera Avenue. That notice should go out this Friday, so you'll receive that by email.
Oh, I walked up there today, by the way. I was just walking by there. They're putting flags up that could, it's a lot easier to see the retaining walls and stuff. They're actually putting 2x4s at the height of the retaining walls with actual flags that are about a foot apart that are pink. So I think it'll be very nice to be able to actually see it through the forest. So anyway, I just wanted to say
Did
that.
you arrange a tour?
No, they got the public space, that little walkway that's right next to it. So I was just walking by and I saw the guy putting it up. So thought it was interesting.
You hiked all the way up there?
I went all the way up Mount Tam today and went around. They're
Wow.
finally building my project on Presidio. I'm like, over there.
Well, very cool. So we also have before us tonight, 3 sets of meeting minutes. January 28th, March 11th, and March 25th. Are there any comments from any of the commissioners on any of these 3 meeting minutes?
I need to abstain from the first 2. I was not here.
Yeah, okay. So any comment on those meeting minutes?
None for me.
I didn't have any.
Okay, so we'll take the first 2 and vote on those without you, Jim.
Okay.
And so we can say aye altogether for the first 2, the January 28th and the March 11th. Ready?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, we pass those. And then on March 25th, the 4 of us can vote to pass that. Ready?
Aye.
Okay. So you've got 3 sets of meeting minutes that are in your back and your hands. All right, with that said, let's adjourn tonight.